Hi everybody. So I guess one of the things I just start off with in terms of who am I, where I come from, and I'm wearing this, three-piece suit and tie and all this stuff, and I really totally want to rip it all off, but there's a lot of, well, not that way, but not that way. The Black Knight's on the other block, right? We've worked with all kinds of organizations, everywhere from hundreds of thousands of employees to hundreds of employees to very few. And I think the very first thing that people ask me is, well, how many people do you need in your organization for organizational structure to really matter? Right? And I'll tell you, my flippant but honest answer is 2. Right? Once you get past the sole proprietor, well, you're just delegating to yourself anyways, so all the structure's in here. But the minute you've got to get work done through someone else is the minute that structure matters. Right? And we'll talk about what it is and why it matters and all that good stuff in 4. So here are the 5 questions that I hope that we can address in some way, shape, or form. Right? What is it in the first place, right? Is it working? Do I really need to care about it? Right? Even if I know what it is, do I really need to care about it? And if I do need to care about it, what does good look like? What is good structure? What does that really mean? And then if I have got to get from where I am today to something that's closer to good, how do I do that? And how do I know that it's making a difference, right? So that's my crazy fancy way of saying, I guess there's some things about getting work done that we need to figure out, right? But why? Why does it matter in the first place? Do you guys have any thoughts or ideas about why you might even be interested in something called organizational structure and why we kick off with this topic at all? That's okay. Yeah, I know, you didn't think that it was going to be all, you're going to have to do anything, you're just going to show up and get some stuff. Yeah, which is fine too, which is totally fine too. And that's kind of our point in this part of the series as well, is just to sort of level set some key knowledge and information as well. So the main reason, or let's not even talk about why it's important first. I'm going to come back to that. What is it? What am I talking about? Right? So what is structure? How about we go there, Landis? So the least technical yet precise definition I can think of is that it is a system of hierarchy. Period. Right? That's really what it is, right? And so when you hear that word hierarchy, you probably might get a little bit nervous. Oh, we're not hierarchical. I don't want to be in a hierarchy. That sounds like a command and control, maybe even a pyramid, maybe even a whole bunch of stuff that is just really rigid. That sounds really rigid. And that's, in fact, not the definition of hierarchy. That's the definition of bureaucracy. That's just bad management within a hierarchical structure. Okay? So let's not confuse the two, and we'll come back to that as well as we go, right? So hierarchy really is a system of who is accountable for what outcomes, results, measures, activities, right? And how those accountabilities are delegated to others to have subsets of accountabilities, right? So this is the fundamental building block of all organizations that consist of more than 2 people, right? And my firm is just 4 people. We're 4 partners and an office leader. And so as the 4 partners, there's 4 bosses and 1 doer. So hierarchy kind of is really crazy in our office. But then there's others that we've worked with that are 10, 20, 50,000s. And the hierarchy still exists, right? And it just gets more complicated, tricky, needs more outright written down, discussed, well documented and well communicated clarity. right? So that's the other part of structure, where we need to identify, well, who is accountable for what? What's your job? What do you have to get done? And what is your boss going to keep you honest about, right? So we call them jobs and reporting structures. So we'll talk about lines and boxes in a moment, right? But generally, when we talk about structure, we think about, okay, there's a job, a clear set of accountabilities, and then there's other jobs that have some sort of relationship with that job, right? So it's jobs and relationships so far, right? And why we do that is it sets how the organization operates and the flow of work in general, right? So, simple language, right? Just how we get stuff done. Should be pretty natural, right? Should be pretty simple, so why do we have to think so hard about it? Why are you asking me all these tough questions already at 8 in the morning, 9 in the morning, Len? It really... Well, it kind of matters because it's the single most important factor in getting work done when you're trying to get work done through other people, right? So individually, it actually doesn't matter that much. There's lots of people who are very organized, right? Lots of people who are very planful. In fact, some people, like Janet, for example, who can't operate without a plan. Right? Not you, Leah. I'm just talking about a colleague of Leah's. You just need to have it all sort of laid out, set out, planned out, right? Well, that's a form of structure, right? That's structuring the work to get the work done. Right? Then the minute you've got to get it done through someone else, this really dirty word comes into play. It's called communication. You actually need to get clear about what you want, how you want it, when you want it by, and how much resource, meaning time, money, effort, attention, direction, you are willing to commit to get that, right? And that's where structure starts to matter. Because if you haven't got that sorted out, when you move from one person to two people, it can get messy, right? Partnerships, relationships, marriages need structure. It is a structure, right? And in that case, it may well be a partnership structure where you have equal authority, right? Well, it's a joint bank account. I have the same signing authority as my wife, but not really, right? I get to sign the checks for all the kids' clothes, the tuition, whatever we need to spend, but I really don't get to sign the checks around, art or new clothes or anything to do with anything that goes into the four walls of the house. But I have to sign the mortgage check, right? So we've actually separated our duties and accountabilities quite nicely, and we're quite accountable for that. And then as our organization grows, right, so we have two boys, they're 12 and 7, they get accountabilities too, like taking care of the yard, but I have to buy the mower, right? So these things get more and more complex, right? Once we get to about 10 people, it gets to a point of complexity where you need to start to write things down, because not everybody can keep it in their head all the time. And it's usually not the boss, actually. The person doing the delegating usually has it all in their head, right? It's the person getting delegated to. It's like, what did you say again? What did you say again? What did you say again? Like, it's fascinating to me. Like, my 12-year-old's been going to school now for 8 years and still doesn't really understand the morning routine, right? Simple stuff like, okay, once you eat, brush your teeth, then get dressed. Don't get dressed, then brush your teeth, because then you're going to get yourself all messy, right? Just simple stuff like that. But it gets complicated when you're running a grocery mart, right? 20 people, suddenly you've got 10 of them that are like, well, I think we should all be at the front today, because there's a whole bunch of customers lined up at the front door. But there's stuff in the back to sell them, right? Somebody's got to take care of that. But often, it's often the other way around. I've got my work to do. I'll just do my job, and I'll be clear and firm about that, and I won't have to worry about anybody else's job. And when we turn that into something at scale, that's called silos, right? Ever heard of this thing? We've got silos here. We've got to get rid of the silos. Well, silos are just another form of communication. That dirty word again, right? It's just stuff that I've got my thing, you've got your thing, and we can figure all our things together. Well, guess who gets to break down silos? Oh, wait a minute, I need to turn your heads. Hold on, sorry to confuse you. If this is getting too distracting, I'll just stay still. I'll try to stay still. So, guess who gets to break down silos? Who might you think?
Managers, you.
Yeah, it's mostly managers, right? So when you think in a system of hierarchy, which is the basic building block here, right? Somebody has delegated work to someone else, right? They may have delegated that work and said, talk to whoever you need to get that done. Okay. That's a first step in breaking down silos, but it's not the whole way forward, right? The manager actually is the one that has to settle the debates, right? If department manager of, well, let's stick with the grocery mart, shall we? I don't want to steal too much of your thunder. Department manager of one area, let's say of grocery, versus the department manager of the front cashier section, have two different views of how things should work. Well, who settles the debate? Yeah, the store manager, right? And that's how you know how silos get broken down, because it's no other way, right? And that manager would get very frustrated and say, well, why didn't you guys just talk to each other and come up with a solution and figure it out for yourselves, right? Well, that in Inform is a way of delegating that authority to those folks to solve that problem for themselves, right? So that little snippet in itself, you see how we get into real trouble just by design, just by the way we think of and structure our work. And that's why this definition, first and foremost, is really, really important. So when you multiply that again from 2 people to 20 people to 200 people to 2,000 people, the complexity of it just goes mind-boggling, right? And the place where it gets beyond general human brain capacity is at about somewhere between 150 to 200 people. The 1% of the very best leaders I know in my 20 years of experience can barely keep on top of the names and the jobs of about 150 people. Beyond that, they're kind of like, well, I'm not quite sure. That's why I have managers and managers of managers and stuff, right? So there's also a human limit to structure that's really important. So if we get this structure right, we can design a whole bunch of stuff. So the diagram here is really important. This is what we have to do to structure work. It's just a twofold thing, right? We need to think about the vertical, so layers of management, right? Who has what authorities and accountabilities and delegates them to who's next, right? All the way to actually getting the work done. And then there's the horizontal, moving across different departments, functions, or different ways you might group things, right? So we call it grouping, but it's really just the way you put work together across a process or a set of activities, or it could be geographic in a region, in a space, or it could be something completely different, like different product lines, right? Or different combinations of those. You know, there's products we sell at the front of the store, and products we sell at the back of the store, and products that we sell at the outside of the store, and products that we sell in the middle of the store. And there are people who are accountable for each of those things. So it's both geographic, departmental, and in fact a third part, which is product-based, right? So it could be any of that stuff, and we'll figure out how to make some sense of that over the next little bit. So that's what structure is, right? Now, the reason I take this long to talk about what the definition is because most people that I know of in HR start the conversation about organizational structure saying that this is not about boxes and lines. Yet most leaders I've worked with start the conversation with me like, okay, so here's the lines and here's the boxes that we're going to connect. This is what the structure is going to be, right? It's not about boxes and lines, right? But that's not really a good definition because that's a negative definition. So what is it? If organizational structure is not about boxes and lines, what is it? Thoughts? Anyone who want to jump in?
With the flow of work and the jobs and the tasks within those.
Yes, I gave you all the answers 10 minutes ago, right? It is. It really is sets of accountability and how those sets of accountability report to each other, right? But it is very hard. It's a series of conversations about who has to get what done by when, right? That's really what it's about. You can draw it out on an org chart if you like, but that's only a graphic representation of a series of conversations about what are you accountable for and how are you going to get that done. That's the basis of work, right? So we somehow along the way got that messed up. It became more about the org chart and where our place in the org chart is than about structure or design. So a way to think about this is more than just structure, which is the drawing. It's the way to think about it is about design. So I think about it from the perspective of any designer, a system designer, an interior designer, software designer, right? There's more than just the final output, which might be this nice simple diagram. It's a whole bunch of factors that go together, right? So it's the jobs, the reporting relationships. It's also the talent you need to get the right people in the right work in those jobs with those relationships. And it's the management practices or the things you do every day, day in, day out to drive in that design, right? And the way I think about it from a change perspective is if you change your design of work from one thing to another, it's like changing your vehicle, right? So if I start in a Ford F-150 today and I redesign to a, let's say an Audi, right? I'm going to change my vehicle to an Audi. Maybe an S5, maybe an R8, maybe an R6, who knows? We can always dream, right? But whatever it is, are you going to drive those two vehicles exactly the same? Well, they both have steering wheels, they both have gear shifts, they both have brake pedals, they both have gas pedals. Same tools. Why wouldn't we drive them the same way? If we're going down the exact same road, we'll be driving the same way. Well, they're designed for different performance, right? So the design of the system itself makes it important for me to think about driving differently, managing differently, doing things in a different way, even though I'm working the same pedals, gears, and shifts, doing them in a different way to get best performance out of the way I've designed that system or the way that thing was built to run, right? So this is what we have to think about. It's not just the boxes and lines, okay? So let's stop here. Is this all completely academic or everybody's structure working well so far? So I got some maybe yes, maybe no.
When I started at my job, my boss, very first thing she said was, this is how our structure is. There's me, and then there's all of you, and you're all equal. And it was like, I don't think that's exactly true. I don't think everybody here is equal in the way you say. You know, how would anything get done? Why would anybody be motivated if they think there's nowhere to move or to grow or to, you know, so I've worked really hard at trying to create a structure that makes sense so everybody knows what they're doing and knows where they can go. And so I think we're getting there. I'd like to think.
Excellent. Fantastic. So what makes it better? What's making it better?
I think now people, everybody's accountable to someone. My boss was a very hands-off kind of manager, so everybody just kind of came to work and did their own thing. Kind of that silo thing you were talking about. They did their job, they kept their head down, and that was it.
Yeah.
Now everybody knows, you know, what they're accountable to do. They know who they're accountable to. Yeah, I think they all know also what the vision and the goal is.
Yeah.
So they're not just coming to work and doing a job, but they know that they're more results oriented, I guess.
Right on. Fantastic. Thanks. What about others? Anybody thinking that there might be some stuff structurally that's working or not working so well? Who's got a great organizational structure and everything's working just fine? Thanks very much, Len. Nobody? Oh, you do. Fantastic. Fantastic. What makes it so?
It's very clearly defined, and don't get me wrong, there's a lot of communication between all the departments, but it makes it it's really easy. I mean, we're still in the hiring phase.
Yeah.
And so as we ramp up and onboard people, it makes it easier to define what your role is within the organization, I think.
Right on. Okay. Thank you. Thank you. Thanks for sharing that. And so we'll come to that in terms of what good looks like. So, you know, we're complete strangers with each other. I don't expect you to share too much of what might or might not be going on. But, Lennis, if you could help me. About 56% of the time, people are experiencing these kinds of things, right? Somebody's got too much to do. Somebody's got not enough to do. Presidents or general managers or key leaders fashion themselves as both or all of the top guy, the marketing person, the human resources person, and the chief bottle washer, right? And end up spending 3/4 to half the time bottle washing than figuring out where the company's going to go and making major decisions, right? Or they've got all these big tasks to do, and they're asking someone who is the bottle washer and who was hired for bottle washing to do a marketing strategy for them. All right. Do these sound like familiar things? These things happen?
No, I don't feel like we're doing as good as I thought.
Well, that's okay.
Yeah, maybe that.
Yeah. You know, one of my favorites is projects that don't seem to talk to each other, yet they're dealing with the same overall bigger problem, right? So I've got 2 different projects. I've got my technology guy taking care of the new equipment we're going to use or the new computer system or whatever. And then I have my operator who's actually dealing with getting the job done or dealing with customers. And the 2 of them are running very different business improvement initiatives, all with the same goal, right? Sounds a bit goofy, but it happens everywhere. From 3 people, usually not in 2 people organizations, but 3-person organizations it happens, and 300,000 people organization happens. I've been there in all of them, and if you cut it all out, cut all the noise out, it really just like, yeah, you just haven't structured it right. You're not talking to each other about the right things at the right time, based on what's the work that needs to get done, right? So these are just some ways. This is a quick, simple way of going, okay, what's at play here? You know, the problem with structure and the problem with design in general is it's one of those invisible things that you actually don't know and you can't put your finger on tangibly, like this table or the work getting done or the cash being counted. You can't actually put a finger on it, but you know and you feel something's not working right here, right? That's the problem with it. It's very thinking work, right? It's very conceptual. It's this fuzzy stuff that people call leadership, but it's the stuff that makes it by design, right? And it has very tangible, real outcomes, right? So just bring it back to real basic design, for example. There's a water cooler in the back corner there, right? It kind of has to be there because it needs to be near an electrical outlet that it can plug in the cooling system. And so we kind of had to put some cups over there, so there had to be a counter over there to put stuff on, because we need stuff on for the water cooler. And we actually needed to put the garbage can right there too, or the recycling bin right there, because that's generally where you're gonna get rid of your used cups, right? All of that was not determined by somebody making deliberate choices. That was determined by the design of the room in the first place, right? But somewhere along the line, somebody designed this room, right? So we kind of have to say, at some point in the game, we have a choice about the system within which we live, we work, and we play. And there are some things that are harder than others. Like, I can't tear this room down now and rebuild it cheaply and easily, but I could eventually, right? So there's some design constraints that I have to live with, and some that I can actually change, right? And they make very tangible outcomes, like I said. So now that actually shapes the travel in the room, where we put things, where we have a break, where people go to for that necessity, right? It's by design. It's the same, very much the same with work, although we don't realize it. We don't feel it because it's just supposed to happen naturally, right? We're just supposed to get it done. So why does this kind of stuff happen? It just happens naturally. We got to go. Let's go. Let's get it done, right? You do this, you do this, you do this. And then 6 months later, it's like, well, I thought you were doing that. Well, I was, but that was 6 months ago. What's happened, right? So things are moving very quickly, and we don't have a plan, right? We're adding a bunch of different things or changing a bunch of different things. And in this economy, it equally applies to growth as it does to not growing, or decline of business or decline of customers, right? It's all about any change in your business conditions or what happens, right? So these things happen quickly. In fact, it's relatively rare now that I hear anyone saying, well, we're not experiencing change very quickly. Things are going pretty slow. We can handle it, right? When things change, they change relatively quickly, and they're getting faster and faster all the time, right? And these are all just different forms of change, right? Some of those stuff that are by design that somehow we feel that we're stuck with are just the hires that have been made in the past, and now they're here, right? And they may have been great for what was existing a year ago, 10 years ago, and a lot of change has happened since, and they may not be the best fit for the role that they're in now. So what do? Do we change the roles, or do we change the person? And the answer, of course, is we redesign for both, right? But the better way to get at that is start with what's driving your organization in the first place, the work itself, right? And so we typically would look to start with, okay, what do we need to get done? And what skills and talent does that take? But when we're in the heat of the moment, it's more like, well, what's your name?
Natalie.
Natalie's right here, and Natalie's a superstar at HR, so we're now just going to work on HR stuff and forget about any of that operational improvement stuff, because Natalie's right here right now, and I've got her, and she's great at that. And that's the job, right? So we're going to put Natalie, who's great at HR, in charge of operations, because we've got Natalie who can do that, right? And Natalie, being so keen and ambitious, would say, yeah, I'll take that on. I can get that done, for sure. Right? And then we end up with a design that's not quite trying to get done what the business is trying to get done, but keep a whole bunch of people together trying to do something that seems productive. Right? So, just checking in. Sounding familiar? Sounding like been there, done that. Get on with the good stuff.
I just have a question about
Please.
how, I guess, what are some of the key considerations an organization would have to consider when you're having to change your organizational structure out of financial necessity? So you're merging, you're downsizing, or you're centralizing. And you don't want to compromise maybe a lot of the product or service delivery you have at the local or regional level.
Yeah.
But you want to find some efficiencies.
Right on. Okay. I think you just answered the question with the question itself, and I'm going to come back to that in about 5 minutes, if that's okay. Because I think everything you just stated was exactly what I would look at from an organizational design perspective to reorganize. And I'll explain why in a second. Okay? Is that okay? But that does really fit with what's coming next, Linus, so there's this whole bunch of different ways of getting stuff done and organizing stuff, right? And we can go on the Googs, as my son calls it now. We'll just ask the Googs. And find out that there's 7,000 different ways to organize, and you'll be hearing a lot about, if you haven't already, about self-organizing systems. And we can be completely flat, and we can just take all this hierarchy out of the system, and everybody should be fine. And in fact, we should just pay everybody $70,000 a year base salary, and the performance will just go through the roof. And this, that, and the other thing, right? And so these are just some structures of some examples out there that really truly exist, right? The way Amazon organizes is truly still traditional hierarchy. The way Google organizes is super uber networked. Everybody talks to everybody else, but you can see when you peel away all the stuff, there's a hierarchy there, right? Microsoft has a whole bunch of divisions that are hierarchical, and each division doesn't like each other. In fact, they're set out to destroy the other divisions. Those are guys holding guns, at each other. But ultimately, it's still a hierarchy. You can see the hierarchical structure in the middle of it. Facebook has this great networked system. They call it a web, and everybody's webbed into everybody else. But the nodes in the webs are accountable for more than other nodes in the webs, right? Or the lines. So that one's probably as far as away you can get from a traditional hierarchical structure, but there's still accountability in there somewhere. Oracle, they have, well, that was just a plain Oracle. Their biggest structure is legal, right? And everything else is technology. And it's this little tiny thing called technology, and they're just a whole bunch of rights changers. It's okay. Okay. Thanks for trying to hang in with us. Appreciate it. And then Apple's got this round radial structure that everybody gets to talk to Steve Jobs, which is a complete fabrication, right? It's not so true. But what's right? Right? To your question is, what's right? And the real answer is nothing's right. None of that's right. Right? There can only be what your organization absolutely, positively needs to accomplish. Right? Now, there are many ways to get at that, right? And so who decides the best way to get at that? And that comes to your top leaders. Your top leaders need to decide how they want work organized, structured, delegated, such that they are most comfortable and most effective at leading, right? Doesn't mean it's old habits that we're structuring to keep old habits alive. Those leaders also probably need to recognize that work needs to be done in a different way than it has in the past, because their business has changed, their customer needs have changed, their organizational makeup has changed. We're merging, or we're getting rid of a division, right? They're changing a whole bunch of things, and changing a whole bunch of things means changing your structure to keep delivering the new set of things that we want to deliver, right? So it actually comes down to defining what those things are first, right? And how you want to work with them. So these are just different labels for that. You could do line structure, functional structure, divisional structure, a matrix structure, and some combination of all of it. Self-organizing, I'll just tell you just straight out and out, bias on my sleeve, really doesn't work. It's been tried since the 80s. We've been in this business now for 20 years. The research that we base all of our design work on has been around for about 50 years. We have gone through the self-organizing fad in the 80s, and we're researching it very heavily again in the 2010s. And ultimately, at the heart of it still remains the condition of hierarchy.
Is it like flat structure? Same.
Similar. Flat structure is different than self-organizing. So there are new twists to it, which are great. There's new technologies that support the movement of work through the working system, which are great. They all very technical, and they actually don't matter that much as long as you get your accountabilities and reporting structures very, very clear. And you can be as flat as you need to. And in fact, flatness is a very important thing that we talk about. There are a lot of organizations that are too flat for their own good, and a lot of organizations that are too tall for their own good. So these things that you hear in the press, you need to really compare to what your organization is really trying to accomplish and have a very strong basis of comparison, right? I'm not poo-pooing the fads. They are great ways of thinking and great stories, and they're tried and true by some very smart and capable people, right? But they don't all work in all situations. What we do know works in all situations is having clear hierarchy all the time, because it's a simple, natural, human condition that we have, and that's what we study. So most organizational structures, as we saw back there in the last slide, are kind of fake, right? It's kind of like stuff we made up to create a system of work. Not much different than this building. It's just a design we made up to get stuff done. The room doesn't have to be square. It's just easier to put straight lines and straight beams together on 90-degree angles for it to be square, right? The room could have been a circle. We just have to use circular beams, right? It's the same with structures. We get to design them. We get to make them look, feel the way we want to. We just need to know what are the natural things at play, right? So things like gravity, things like materials, things like all the physics that go into building a physical structure. Well, there are physics of human structures too, and that's something to think about, something to look at. And not a lot of people talk about it that way, and it's not that complicated. It does come down to some very specific, simple things that sound very natural to you. And that's where I would give you some real encouragement, is to really think hard about what operates naturally and why it's so. Because it may well be the way your system works, right? To put it another way, you said that, when we have clear accountabilities, things are easier, right? It takes less energy to get things started, to get things going, right? Well, that's because you've actually defined things in a more natural state, right? And when you get the structure right, it takes a whole bunch of wasted energy out of the human working system, right? So, how do we get there? Maybe this is coming to your question now, right? This is the consultant's diagram. We can just put past that right now. You've got one in your kit. It'll be fine if you ever want to get back there. But here's the real set of steps, right? The first step is where I would guide you to answer your question first, is what do you want? What do you want out of this? What matters the most? Do you need lower cost? Right? Do you need better access to customers? Do you need happier employees? Do you need bigger market share? Do you need more customers? right? And generally the answer would be yes. All of that, please. And yesterday, if you don't mind, right? So ask the question again. How much do you really need each of those things, to what extent, right? So organizational design does not start with the org chart. It starts with your goals and intended outcomes, right? If it really truly is about cutting costs, then just be honest about it. Let's not waste a whole bunch of energy and say it's about making our people happy. It's about cutting costs because we can't afford to do business this way anymore. Okay, fine. Then people can get behind that and say, well, how do we stay happy and cut costs, right? As opposed to saying, well, why can't we spend money on that? Well, because we're trying to cut costs. But I thought it was about keeping us happy. Right? Now you've got a confused goal. Think about what the organization is trying to achieve. And the hardest things to achieve is accomplishing all of them, right? So we want to have more customers, better customers, and reduce costs and happier employees. In my world, that can all be accomplished by better design, right? If you start with better design, what happens is you get the work system sorted out to accomplish those goals. People start accomplishing those goals, and that creates happiness with good results. Good results create good engagement. Good engagement creates more contribution to more results the next time. It doesn't go the other way. If I make you feel really happy right now, and we're on a losing team, it doesn't create a winning team by keeping you happy. We need performance and to cheer and celebrate better and improvements in our performance to get us happier and then working on the next improvement in performance. It doesn't go the other way around, right? So starting with performance first, not with engagement or happiness. Right. So that's my really long answer to your question. Does that help?
Yep, it does. Thanks.
Okay. But then once you've got these things sorted out, this is really important for you to decide which structure works best. So, okay, so we want lower costs, and that may be our most important factor, and we want to access bigger corporate customers, just as an example, right? That might be our second criteria. And by the way, we don't have a lot of money, so we need to keep this lean, so we are headcount neutral. I'm not adding any heads to my cost base at this point. Okay, fine, great. Constraints realized, right? Then we look at how your current system is organized to achieve those things, and where are there alignments, good things that achieve that, and things that are misaligned, things that are working against that or not quite right, okay? And then we look at different options. We could change these alignments in different ways, these misalignments, right? We can get them better suited, better sorted, and there's not one right answer. There's probably at least two. And in my experience, we usually bring two considerations to the table, and our clients come up with a third. Always. Right? There's always another option. There's always another angle, and it's because of those criteria you set out at the very beginning that says, well, actually, it's not that important. Maybe we need to give a little here and have a little bit of inefficiency here in order to accomplish a different criterion, right? But once you do come up with those options, you can compare it against those things you started the whole conversation out with, right? And say, well, this option seems to have the most pros and the least cons. Let's go with that option. And the beauty of that is you've made a decision, right? You've actually made a design decision. And once you've made a design decision, then you can get into the hard work of doing it and making that change happen, right? So that's all the next stuff. So I'm going to go pretty quickly here. I've got about 5 minutes left. But these are things to keep in mind as you're doing it, right? The old adage, form follows function, you need to keep it in mind, right? What are we trying to get done here? What are we trying to accomplish here? That drives the structure, not the other way around. We have 16 people doing this. How do we keep 16 people busy? Right? That's not it. Roles first, then people. What's the work? What's the work that needs to get done? How does it need to get done? How does it need to be sorted? Then we can figure out who's the best fit for that. They may not be perfect, and there may be misalignments, and then you can tweak. But start with the rules first, right, of what the work needs to get done, what needs to be accomplished. And then people can fit to those roles, and you can tweak the roles, right? Nothing is 100% written in stone, because the beautiful part of it, you're the designer, right? Now, this has a full range of implications too, right? That says, well, I don't want to let anyone go. I just don't want to. Okay, so you've given yourself a constraint, right? The other end is even harder. Okay, everything's up for grabs, and everyone has to reapply for their jobs, and all jobs are new and open, and we might hire completely different people that have never been in our organization before, right? That's actually much harder. And that's why that's resisted, as much as managers will say that, oh, no, it's easier just to fire everybody and get new people who fit. It's actually not. Management-wise, it's actually easier to stick with the people that we already know and have in our working system. The harder decision is to say, well, who fits best, right? And the real answer, though, the best answer is somewhere in between. Well, there's some roles that just absolutely are net new, and some people that will have to be net new. Some roles that we can develop people into, and other roles where we just have had the wrong person in the wrong role, and we could just do a shift and they'd be a great fit, right? I know I'm stealing some of your thunder, but this is how we go, right? Take your time. It can be a iterative process. You can do bits and pieces as you go, right? Unless something's severely broken. Ask for help. You can't change the water in the fishbowl if you're swimming in it. Right? It's really hard to see how cloudy that water is when you're swimming in it. So get an external look. Doesn't have to be full-blown consulting. It can just be somebody to come in and look and say, hey, this is how things are going in here. Or what I've done in retail 100 times is I'm just going to poke around for a day and see what I see, and I'll let you know what I see. Right? And if that makes a difference, it does. If it doesn't, that's okay too. Right? But get some fresh eyes on the system. And be ready to make some tough decisions, as I've talked about. Okay? So how do I know it's working? How do I know once I've designed and I've gone through a bunch of these changes, how do I know it's working? And the answer really comes back to exactly what I said before, right? What is the intent of your organization? Our customers are happier. Our customers are spending more with us per trip, per day. Our stores are cleaner. Our employees seem to be giving us many more suggestions each day on what we can do to improve customer service, increase sales, or decrease costs. Right? Our costs are going down. Right? Now, that's a hard bunch of dots to connect when you're saying organizational structure, but it's not impossible. And in fact, the reality is that's what organizational structure really affects. So use the same metrics that the business would use, right? Find out the ones that matter, right? Are we doing things cheaper? Are we making better results happen faster, right? Those are the two things I'd look at. However you design those numbers or define those numbers for your organization, look at those, right? That's how you'd know. It's not about having HR be better at HR. Right? It's not about having a more effective way of just onboarding people or moving people through the system or training people. Those things might actually be working against your design right now. It's about what are the business outcomes that we're trying to achieve. Okay? So these are the kinds of things. And there's another checklist in your kit. Sort of an 8-question checklist that gives you some ideas of how you might look at whether or not you're achieving these kinds of things. And after a year of reorganizing, go back to the same checklist and see if you're doing better. Right? So with that, we'll leave the questions for Leah. So Leah, I'm going to pass the mic over to you now. And we will have time for questions as we go too, right?